we have a lot of things to share with you this evening. So. I just want to talk about what we want to leave with tonight. We want to make sure that we share the comments, a summary, themes of the comments that we've received to date. We're going to talk about some of the steps that have been undertaken by the airport since we last discussed things in January. They've made some great strides in some of their efforts. We want to share that with you. As we mentioned in our January meetings, we now have the updated noise study, and we'll be sharing the results of that as well. And then we'll go on to talk about the implementation phase of the master plan, and that involves the project scheduling and financial components, the evaluation that we do for those projects over the next 20 years. And then we'll talk about next steps, and then we want to hear your comments, questions, and concerns. So that's what we intend to cover this evening, and we have, I believe, 2 hours set aside for this meeting. So I'm going to keep moving through. As you may recall, when we did this in January, because it is a virtual setup, we have set into the presentation 3 intermittent Q&A sessions. We're asking those to be clarifying questions. We do have at the end of the presentation an open comment session, and that will be for questions or comments that you want to make. And the meeting is being recorded, and we will post this to the project website as we did with the January meetings. And we just ask when you're done speaking if you can mute your microphone. I think we're all muted now, but as you finish speaking, if you could do that. And then we want to take comments. And Russ, I'm going to ask you, we have historically had a raise the hand function, but in this webinar session, what's the best way for people to ask questions?
They can either use the raise the hand function, or they could ask a question in the chat if that's okay with the chairperson.
Yeah, we're going to try and keep everyone to raise the hand function. It's going to be a little bit easier for us to manage. If we will watch the chat, but we'd like you to avoid that one. It's a lot to manage. So appreciate everybody's patience as we go through this, and we'll get started. So we really do appreciate all the comments that we've heard. I want to just talk at a very high level what we heard, themes that we heard. We've put all of that together. We heard from approximately 54 citizens, and the Danvers Board of Selectmen submitted a letter as well. That communication log has been posted to the website. We actually got it posted today, so that's great. So you can look at that under the Master Plan tab, and you'll see that under the meetings piece. And we have removed names and addresses because of privacy concerns. We just didn't want to, we hadn't asked permission to share that, so we took the conservative approach. But we do log all that, but we did not share that online. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us, but we believe we've accurately captured your comments from the last meeting. We listened through the video recording and to make sure we had that correct, as well as we've also posted the letter that we received from Danvers, from the Board of Selectmen. So that's all available for you to look at. And as we did in January, and with this communication log, we'll do the same with your comments this evening. And we will be taking those and documenting those through the process. I'll talk a little bit about the themes we heard through the public comment process. There were 4 themes, very, very important themes all the way through. Community communication was a theme that we heard consistently. Requests for advance notification when there are anticipated events, and information sharing. There was also a request for routine communication with all the communities around the airport about airport activities, what's going on, information if there's anything that's happened that was unanticipated, just sharing of information. So we've had quite a bit of conversations. Gloria and her team have worked hard to give some thought to how they can do that in an efficient and effective way, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. Other comments that we heard was concern that there was no economic benefit to the communities, no return into the communities other than Beverly, concern about property values as well. So all of those pieces came through and we heard those. And then obviously, as you know, the overwhelming number of comments pertain to existing noise issues. I would say unequivocally, 90% of the comments we received had to do with the existing noise that you've all experienced, or many of you have experienced from the airport. And we understand that, and we acknowledge that. We also heard concerns about if there is proposed runway extension being considered, what will that mean as far as noise, and and there were concerns about the potential for increased noise related to that. The fourth topic was really safety-based issues. We heard comments about jet fuel odors, aircraft accidents, and the lighting program that's being proposed to replace the airfield lighting from its current system to an LED system. So those were the comments that we heard, and I want to talk to a few of those as we go through this and try to address some of those. So I want to talk most importantly about what has been undertaken by the airport. Most importantly, the commission has formed a noise subcommittee, and that committee is about to begin to put its arms around the issues and look at their membership. They have requested participants from the different municipalities. That discussion is underway. So the formation, they haven't had a first meeting yet. They're working on the membership right now. But anticipate that the noise subcommittee will be actively engaged in reviewing complaints, meeting with operators, really doing everything they can to promote the voluntary noise abatement procedures, provide a routine update to the airport commission, and really the airport has worked diligently to enhance their internal review process and tracking of noise complaints. If you've had an opportunity ahead of this meeting, if you haven't, I just encourage you to go to the airport's noise and safety webpage. They've loaded a tremendous amount of information. There's guidance from the FAA. There's other resource links. There's contact information, and there's actually quite a bit of information there. And I just encourage you to look at that. That's also where you can submit any noise complaints, and that now is linked into a monitoring system for the airport staff. So, in addition, Gloria has worked with the air traffic control tower, the flight schools, in conversations with the operators about the voluntary noise abatement procedures and the concerns from the neighborhoods about noise. And in our discussions as we've gone through this review and listening to the comments, we had a lot of conversations about what's going on and what this increase how it has occurred. And it seemed, while you have had noise complaints in the past, and we certainly heard a lot of comments about a more recent increase in activity. And in conversations, one of the things that we've talked about internally, and we're seeing it across with our other GA airports in the country, is that understanding that through the pandemic, we had all the flight schools were in essence shut down for several months, and in some states shut down extensively, but for the most part 3 months or more. And we understand from a flight training program for those students trying to get their training done and accomplished, we knew that there was a pent-up demand when those flight schools reopened. And our sense is some of that increased activity was a result of that pent-up demand, and those students, as the weather improved through the summer, taking on much more flight activity than they probably had originally planned. That remains to be seen if that's an accurate assumption, but we've had a lot of conversations about it, and I want you to know that your comments did not go unheard. The other things that have occurred is I want to give credit to the flight school, Aviator Flight School, They have shared with us their newly introduced Good Neighbor policy. They are really coming to understand the noise issues and how they work with their students, and they've implemented this Good Neighbor policy to hopefully make some improvements, and they're committed to doing this. And Gloria has worked hard, and they've had genuine conversations about how they can make some improvements, and I think that that's a very good indication. And I know Gloria is committed to continuing that conversation across the airport with the other operators. Some of the other actions that have been undertaken too is that, Wes and Gloria, Wes as the airport air traffic control manager, tower manager, and Gloria are on constant communication about operational issues, sharing information when there is issues with aircraft staging because they have a ground hold where they're holding and what that means as far as noise and jet fuel. So that conversation is ongoing, and I think people are very aware of that concern. I do want to reiterate, this is an airport, and I want to be very clear that the airport goes above and beyond to meet all federal and state safety requirements. And we understand the environment of an airport and understand what that means for the neighbors, and acknowledge that there are occasional unanticipated events with aircraft, but the airport has done everything within its ability and means to meet all of those standards. The comment about the Airfield LED lighting that was brought up, I just wanted to raise that, is that discussions about that is an energy efficient project. And what that is going to do is provide lighting at the same level of brightness that occurs on the airfield today. This is not to enhance lighting or brightness on the airfield, it is simply an energy project. So it should match the existing airfield lighting brightness. The next piece is that the commission is quite aware of the need to, and they are committed to making sure that there is good, strong communication with the municipalities. And they will continue, the airport staff will continue to support the commission in providing any information so that they can be communicating that specifically to the Danvers Select Board. So that's information. The Select Board's been very keen on having an ongoing dialogue, and the airport's committed to doing so. Gloria has also been very active with the social media posts onto their Facebook page and blogs about what's going on at the airport. We've talked about the need to understand that some folks in the community are not social media folks, and some traditional means of communication is helpful as well. So you'll be seeing a semi-annual community newsletter coming out from the airport, talking about activities, what's going on, and some of the issues and concerns. So hopefully that will start to spread a lot of information out to all of you as appropriate. In conjunction with that, the conversation around establishing a communication system to advise citizens of airport activities. That kind of a system can run from a very low-cost system to a very expensive system. And as you may or may not be aware of, there's just a few staff at the airport. Gloria has a small staff, and managing that so that it's effective and efficient is going to be very important. She's going to be exploring that, and we anticipate that may be an opportunity where citizens can sign up for an email blast, and the airport will provide that information on a routine basis. That would probably be the most financially efficient and effective method to get the word out. And then the last thing, if you haven't had a chance to go to the airport website, I encourage you to take a look at MassDOT's Aeronautics Economic Impact Study. I know there was a lot of conversation about the return of benefit to the airport the economic impact study really does a great job illustrating how an employee from the airport, you know, at the flight school employee takes their paycheck and spends it back into the community, buying groceries, going to the doctor, going to the vet. So there is a tremendous amount of gain that does come back in, and I just encourage you, if you have a moment, if you have concerns around that, to take a moment to read that study. It is quite informative. So with that, I'm going to take a moment and ask if anybody has any clarifying questions about what we just spoke about.
We have a hand raised by Michelle.
Hi, Michelle. Michelle, you may be on mute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
I filed a complaint about 3 weeks ago on the website on a specific airplane, and I got no response. Like, so what purpose do we use the website for if we're getting no response?
Michelle, I can answer that. So in the response that's sent immediately when individuals do file a noise report, is that each noise report is looked at when time is allowed, and then when the communication can be made with each individual stakeholder. So that's the tower manager, potentially a flight school, potentially not a flight school, sometimes the FBO or a private owner. So when time allows, that is when usually about 4 stakeholders get together for each noise report or response. So it does take a little bit of coordination with that and time. So there is usually, as the email indicates, is that the response is made when time is available.
Gloria, if it took me 3 weeks to respond to somebody in my business, which is medical field, I would be fired. It's ridiculous that it takes over 3 weeks to get a response about a noise complaint that was happening at 8 o'clock, after 8 o'clock at night.
I understand your frustration. Again, we have very limited staff, and when time allows, I have many entities that I work with for each noise report. And each noise report is looked into. We look at the flight track, we talk with the tower, we try to find out if it's within our jurisdiction. So again, that does take a lot of time and coordination with the actual stakeholders involved. So I thank you for your comment, though the time it does say when time allows, your noise report will be addressed in the most
Gloria.
possible.
Gloria, can you answer me a question that's happening right now? I've been home since 4:30 and there's been nonstop flights over our neighborhood area since 4:30.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that a noise study at the airport has addressed our needs as a community. And you told us that back in January that the needs of the community would be addressed tonight. All I'm hearing is the same thing that you presented to us in January. So I'm confused and a little, disappointed that this is going to cause another summer of listening to this nonstop.
Sure. So we're going to go actually into the noise study further in the presentation, so you can certainly ask more questions about the noise study once we go into that in further detail.
All right, we'll wait for that. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Have a Betancourt. Good
Yes.
unmute.
How you doing?
Mr. Betancourt, yes?
Yeah, how you doing? The question I have now on the jet planes, right? When they take off, do they have to follow the winds, or can they go in any direction?
And they follow the wind.
What I mean is, with the small planes, I mean, they have to go with the wind. I mean, does the jet plane have to also go in the direction of the wind?
Typically they do, and that is the pilot in command's decision on how they determine their departure out of the airport.
Well, the reason why I'm asking that is because if you folks are, right now you got a 20 passenger jet taking off, and it takes off on, say, runway 27. And it's only like 4,100 feet, if I'm not mistaken. So the question I have is, with the expansion of the other runway, right? What size planes are going to take off over there?
Again, we'll talk more about it here in a little bit, but you know, the aircraft that are operating at the airport are the aircraft that are operating at the airport. It's not going to allow, you know, or it's not going to promote larger aircraft from operating on the airport. In fact, if anything, if you're talking about aircraft that are operating on 927 right now, given what's being proposed with the paving of the safety areas / you know, extension, as well as the narrowing of 927, those types of aircraft are going to be encouraged effectively operationally to be operating on 1634.
That's what I'm asking. The reason being, but what size aircrafts are going to be? Because if the aircraft that's there right now is taking off on runway 27, it's only 4,100 feet, where the other one's going to be, was it 5,100 plus another 6? It's going to be
927 right now is 4,755, and what on 1634 is currently 5,001 feet.
Exactly.
So it technically remain 5,001, but for departures, they can use 5,301 feet. So again, you know, for those types of aircraft, and I have to stress that those are aircraft that are, as you just noted, that he's operating on 927 right now. Those aircraft are there and are currently operating at the airport, and because of the changes we're talking about, they will effectively be encouraged to be operating on the primary runway, which is 1634.
Okay. Another question I have. On the accident that happened at 85 Brill Street with that plane, is there any information on that yet? What happened? Any determination on what happened?
It usually takes the FAA
a year. I know they just did the Wings of Freedom tour, which was that aircraft was here a week before it crashed in Connecticut. I know they just took a whole week for them to do that. They just come up with pilot error and maintenance problems on that plane. I was just curious about Davis. So we don't know anything about Davis yet. What happened with that plane?
No.
Okay. And one other question I have. Now, how much land does Beverly have? They already sold off 6 parcels of land since I've been going to the airport meetings, which has been about 15 to 17 years. So how much land does Beverly still have over there? And I know they're going to sell off more parcels.
So Mr. Betancourt, we'll talk about that as we get a little further along into the implementation and the opportunity for development. We're just taking questions on the prior portion.
No, I understand, but I'm just trying to...
Yep.
Well,
we'll make a note to talk about that when we get to them.
I'll answer that question, Mr. Betancourt, when we get there, I promise.
Okay, well, the reason why I'm asking is because usually, the last couple of airport meetings, I raise my hand and they don't pay attention. They don't even listen. Even when you call, lately, all my neighbors have been calling, putting complaints in. No one gets a call back. And what's sad is, I thought this airport commission was going to get better. It's getting worse. I've been watching it for 17 years. The other guys I thought were terrible, but this is even worse now. Before, at least Mr. Mazzetti used to call us back. Paul Vitale called, come over to the house, see what was going on. There's no communication at all. It's terrible. It's getting worse. So I don't understand what's going on. And one more question can I ask? Do you guys did a noise study already?
Yes, the noise study is complete, and we'll be presenting it here this evening.
How the hell can you do a noise study? It's been so quiet around here. I haven't seen it this quiet in 15 years. Well,
we have a noise study expert on the line to talk about how they conducted the noise study.
How?
Okay.
It's nothing's flying. How are you gonna do a noise study? That's what I want to know.
You'll get the answer shortly.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay.
Mr. Betancourt has raised his hand again. Mr. Betancourt, could you? Oh, thank you.
I thought I did it by mistake. I apologize. Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And let's move on to the noise study. And I'm going to introduce Mike Outwards. And Mike, you want to take the stage?
Sure. Thank you, Hillary. Good evening, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Mike Alberts. I am with the firm Crawford, Murphy & Tilley, and I will be presenting the noise contours plan. Now, my presentation is about 10 minutes long and will be followed by another opportunity for questions and comments. I will be reading from my prepared notes during the presentation. This ensures that we are presenting the same information in the same manner during the 3 community meetings this week. Let me begin by identifying that noise contours are prepared to help airport owners better understand compatible and non-compatible land uses around the airport. Contours are not to make a case that the aircraft don't generate noise and that the community is not experiencing noise and overflights. Contours do help identify what tools and resources an airport and local communities can employ to help mitigate incompatible uses. Contours also establish a baseline of the current condition and project how these conditions will change in the future, resulting from increase in aircraft operations or a change in the types of aircraft that may operate at the airport. The noise contours have been prepared using a computer simulation model, the FAA's Aviation Environmental Design tool. This model is required for use by the FAA when developing noise contours. FAA specifically indicates that single event sound level measurements in the field cannot be used to develop noise contours. All right, next slide, please. Thank you. The noise contours are expressed in the day-night average sound level DNL metric. The DNL represents the average sound level over a 24-hour period and includes the cumulative effects of all events occurring during that period. For each operation that occurs during the nighttime hours between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m., the sound levels are increased by a 10 decibel weighting penalty. This weighting factor has been included to account for the increased sensitivity to noise during relaxation or sleeping hours. The DNL is the required metric for assessing aircraft noise impacts by the FAA in their formal FAR Part 150 noise study process, as well as used in determining significant noise impacts in the National Environmental Policy Act studies. Additional details on the DNL metric is available in the study report, and the study report is available on the airport's website. The FAA has also established guidelines for what land uses it identifies as being compatible or not compatible within various DNL noise contour levels. These are shown on the slide in Table 1. The land uses include residential, public use, commercial, manufacturing and production, and recreational. The guidelines in this table indicate that all lands below 65 DNL are compatible with the noise they experience. This full table is included also in the noise study report, and it can be looked at it there in closer detail. Next slide. Moving on to the noise contours. Individual just asked how we prepare the contours when there's no aircraft right now. Well, what we did was we used the computer simulation model, which we are required to use, and we went back and looked at the existing calendar year 2019, last year before, as we all know, the pandemic modified things. So we prepared the 2019 65, 70, and 75 Dnl contours. We can see on the slide that the contours do primarily remain within the limits of the airport property boundary, with just a small portion going off airport near the end of runway 34. During the development of the contours, we did have discussions with air traffic control tower manager so that we could accurately reflect in the model how aircraft operate into and out from the airport. I would like to note on the slide there that circular shaped contour near the center of the airport property or on the west side. That is a result of the helicopter takeoffs and landings that operate on that ramp. Next slide, please. Looking into the future to see how the contours will change, we have prepared the 2029 65, 70, and 75 Dnl contours. The operations used in the modeling came from the aviation activity forecast that were prepared as part of this master plan. As we can see on the screen, they are slightly larger than 2019 due to the forecast increase in operations expected to occur. We also see that the additional runway pavement on the 16 and 34 end have also been included in the modeling of the 2029 condition. And next slide, please. Looking further into the future, we have also prepared the Dnl contours for the year 2039. And again, they get slightly larger given the forecast of increased operations in 2039. As with 2019, the 2029 and 2039 65 and greater Dnl contours primarily remain within the limits of the airport property boundary. In all 3 years, there are no residences or other incompatible uses within the 65 contour. So from an FAA land use compatibility standpoint, all the lands around the airport are compatible with the noise they receive. But we all recognize that noise does not stop at a 65 contour line, which is why the airport, has established a voluntary noise abatement program, some of which we just were presented with the flight school elements that they just enacted. And the full program is available on the airport website. We also just heard about the establishment of the Airport Commission Noise Subcommittee that will provide the ongoing review and potential enhancements to the noise abatement recommendations, and will include the participation of community representatives. So we have a base 2019 noise contours and a set of future contours. And the contours are not set in stone. They are a snapshot in time, and they will be updated periodically with future master plans or other environmental studies. The National Environmental Policy Act does require an environmental assessment study be prepared for a number of airport improvement projects. The environmental assessment, not only requires a noise analysis, but 15 other environmental categories to be examined. Again, the complete noise study is available on the website and includes all of the information used in the development of the contour. I know I have said 65 Dnl a lot during my presentation. I would like to mention here that there has been a recent study by the FAA that's been made available to the public about 2 months ago. The study is called the Neighborhood Environmental Survey. The study is part of FAA internal evaluation to determine if the 65 Dnl should remain the standard or if it should be changed or lowered. The use of the 65 Dnl has been in place since the early 1980s. Back then, it was established in part from a social survey of citizens, their level of annoyance, aircraft noise. This new study that the FAA prepared emulated that original survey, and the results in the new survey show a very large increase in the levels of annoyance. This doesn't mean that the policy will immediately change. The results of the survey are very significant. Any policy change would have to go through, layers of government review, and that will take time. There is a summary of the findings, again, on the FAA webpage, and I encourage everybody to give it a look. There's a summary, and there's the full study, which is 300 to 400 pages. The link to the FAA webpage that includes this is provided on the airport's noise page. With that, that concludes my presentation of the contours, and we will now open it up for some questions.
Mike, even before that, I just would mention also, and forgive us for not introducing, we do have a representative of the FAA on the line as well tonight, Mr. Richard Doucette. And so, Mike, thanks for the presentation. And Richard, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to the presentation or any of Mike's comments, or we just open it up for questions. I guess we'll just leave it open for questions then.
So does anyone have any questions?
We have an Aaron Henry.
Hi, Aaron.
Hi all, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, thank you.
Great. Hi, good evening everybody. Third time I've gotten to see this in the last 48 hours, so now it's starting to make sense to me a little bit. I just had a quick question on the noise contours. Is that a bit like, and sorry to talk a little shop, but to me that looks a lot like a photometric plan, except we're doing it with a noise on like a surface. It's like a noise surface instead of a light surface. And assuming that is the case, how difficult is it to see the iterations down, 55, 45, just to see?
The noise model does have the ability to generate additional contour intervals, whether it's 1 DNL or 5 DNL. When we're talking about contours that go out to 55 or below, what the model is focused on, and I should have explained this earlier, the model is required for use because it only includes aircraft noise. If we're in the field and let's say we're taking sound level measurements with the sound level meter, we're not only getting the aircraft noise, but the truck on the highway and the birds chirping and the school bus and the garbage truck. So FAA requires us to use the model.
Yeah, I'm not. I think I get the model. I'm happy with. I get that. I'm just wondering, for informational purposes, if you wanted to do the next couple of contours, we could. I don't think it's. I understand. Doesn't mean anything to the FAA study and standards that are in place at the moment. I'm just intrigued by understanding, even if we expand that surface out, what we see.
It certainly has the capabilities to do it. What I was getting at is once we start getting to the 55 and 50 and 45, then because it's just the aircraft's noise solely, the background levels in the community would be higher, than what we're showing as a 50 or 45 purely from aviation. So it can be readily shown. I mean, I think that was your answer. Can it be shown? Yes, it can. But once we get to those quieter levels, it wouldn't be that realistic because the background noise in the community would then be, higher than what the aircraft would be making that far away from the airport. Long answer, But short answer is yes, it has that capability. But I just wanted to explain why it would be, a bit muddled, due to ambient, community background sound levels, which are in the 45 to 50 range, depending on the type of land use.
Yep, got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a question from Michelle.
Go ahead. Oh.
Hi again. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but under my understanding, it sounds like the light or the noise study benefits the airport owners and not in the area around the airport, but it doesn't address the issue of the repetitive flights that are coming and going and the training that has been happening increasingly since last May. We want the airport to address the problem with the repetitive aircraft going over our homes and creating noise that you can't even enjoy your outdoor living space. That is what we would like the airport to address, but they're not addressing it. So I love that you did an airport sound study for the FAA's purpose, but it doesn't address the areas that the neighborhoods are dealing with. We're taxpayers in these towns, and we deserve an answer as to why it has increased since 2020, May, maybe. I mean, and don't tell me it's because of COVID, because the noise wasn't this bad in 2019. It wasn't this bad 20 years ago. It wasn't this bad 30 years ago. I've lived in this house for 38 years. We are very aggravated with the issue that no one is addressing what we're looking for. You're just trying to push us towards more airplanes and expanding the airport.
Hey, Michelle, on the contours is almost, I wouldn't say a first step, but it's one way to look at using the federal guidelines. Let's run these contours and see if the contours extended off the airport property boundaries or not, from a federal compatibility standpoint. And if they did, then there would be different avenues for the airport to take to try and get sound mitigation funding or other alternatives. So this was kind of a first step in saying, okay, where are the official noise contours? Okay, they fall within the limits of the airport property boundary. So federal funding and federal involvement, is not the next step. But what is the step is the continuation of, the airport and the noise subcommittee and Gloria working with you and everybody else. I know it's not the answer you want to hear right now, but I just want to clarify that the contours themselves is almost, let's see if we have an impact based on federal guidelines, and then we could do certain things. We found we don't have that on federal guidance, so we're going to continue on, on the local level.
Thank you, Mike. Gloria, can you address the issue that there are 2 flight clubs flying right now, Aero Club and West Side, that are bombarding us right now, overhead? Did you talk with them?
Sure. So I'm not exactly 100% sure what your question is. We addressed what we are doing with the flight schools, with our operators. They still do have to make their requirements as far as whatever it is required. We did form a noise committee group. We have requested members of the community. The commission has worked very hard and diligently with some local representatives as well as members of the community. We've conducted this noise study, which we were not eligible for. So the airport we actually take great pride in being able to actually do this noise study as part of the master plan and to gather this information that we can present to the public. We have had very good conversations with the air traffic control manager, as well as the flight schools and what they are actively doing. And these are activities that are, certainly they are seeing the response from the community. So they have taken these actions, as well as work with their manager in making sure that we still have to have a safe operating environment. Safety is our number one priority. And so that we are making sure that these flights are still operating in the safest environment possible while maintaining our grant assurances and also keeping the community informed on what we are doing. So this is a really good start to what we have been doing with the flight schools, with our operators, with the air traffic control manager, in keeping in going forward with the noise abatement program and the good neighbor policy that one of the flight schools has put together, and the other flight clubs. They also, like I said, they also have requirements, but they're not all training flights. Those are typically rental flights. So normally the amount of people that are in those flights just take off and land at another airport. So those are not necessarily training flights, even though they are called flight clubs. Those are not necessarily training flights. Does that answer your question?
No, it doesn't, Gloria, because they're not going anywhere. We can track them, and we're tracking it. And this flight has gone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, probably about 20 times in the last 20 minutes over our house. Here he comes again. So, Gloria, I'm sorry that I am so aggravated, but we've been complaining for over a year, and we have seen no steps to help us in our neighborhood deal with this problem. Can they use a different runway? Can they go somewhere else, or do a touch and go here and then go to Lawrence? I mean, it's not acceptable that these flights are just constantly going overhead, constant. And if I got an answer to my email when I emailed you 3 weeks ago, I wouldn't be using this session to complain. But it's not being answered. So if you're looking for my vote as to whether you can expand the airport or not, no, I'm not going to vote for it, and I'm going to vote out anybody in this town that will vote. Thank you.
If Michelle, if I could just add one additional thing, Gloria, as well. I just want to make sure it's clear, and I know we've talked about it at the previous public meeting, and that is, what the airport can and can't do when it comes to controlling of aircraft that are operating, in and out of the airport. Ultimately, the airport does not control what aircraft operate in and out of the airport. They can't control how those aircraft are operated. It's much like Route 128. The state can't control who's driving on 128. The airport can actually control who's coming in and out of the airport. Yeah. The only means by which they might be able to do that even extends over to the air traffic control tower. They're there to provide facilities and safe facilities and services to accommodate those activities. The steps that the airport is taking right now in terms of establishing a noise subcommittee and working towards establishing more formalized voluntary noise abatement procedures, such as Aviair has advanced, is the most pragmatic and practical way that the airport can affect change for your benefit. And so those are the steps that they're taking, right now. There are other steps that could potentially be brought into play at a federal level, but again, that's really kind of the basis of what we're looking at in the noise study. And it's only if we start running into situations where there's incompatible land development inside that 65 Dnl. So unfortunately, based on, the results of the noise study, those aren't going to be made available to us. So the most reasonable and practical solutions that the airport can affect change on right now are the steps that we're taking right now. And that the airport will continue to move forward on in partnership, hopefully with the tenants, to recognize that these are challenges that you're all facing, and that there are things that people can do to lessen the impacts on the surrounding neighborhoods. And I would invite Richard also, if he has any comments, to add to that.
Yeah, just would echo what you said, Jim, that any craft that can safely operate there cannot be turned away. The best that the neighbors can do around the airport and around every airport is to work with the airport operator, and they'll work with the flight schools to do things to try to minimize that repetitive training flights over your house, to vary the pattern, to vary the runways, et cetera, et cetera. Unfortunately, at a relatively small airport and small aircraft, the noise will never get loud enough for there to be much that we could do on the federal level. The best we can do is work with the operators to try to find out the types of operations that really bother people and try to vary those operations. It does is move the noise around. It doesn't decrease the total amount of noise, but if you can vary the pattern, I think that helps a great deal. And unfortunately, that's typically the best you can do with flight schools, is to vary the pattern and move the noise around.
Thank you. We haven't had any variance of the pattern at all over the last year, and I guess that's our major complaint. Is we would like the airport to work with us and help address this. So hopefully in the future it will. As an airport manager, I would think that you'd be able to speak to your tenants and come back to the people and say, we've spoken to the tenants and this is what we've come up with. But in the past meetings that we've gone to and we've attended, there is nothing. So I'm a little disappointed, but we'll listen to the rest of your comments. The rest of the presentation. Thank you.
One thing, Michelle, also, and this goes back to the Aviair flight school comments, and some of the flying friendly techniques that they're advocating. And again, they can't specifically, even with their own aircraft, they can't specifically require their pilots to operate in this way, but it's a specific request that they're making as part of their flight program. And that is, instead of the repetitive touch and goes, where the aircraft comes and touches the ground and then takes off right away, they are again, requiring is too strong of a word, but they are requesting that their aircraft operators stop and cycle back around, so they use the full length of the runway. What that does is that it allows their aircraft then to take off quicker on the runway, and so then therefore they will be higher when they do cross over the airport property boundaries. They're also advocating using things like best climb rate and the like. So I'm not just trying to promote Aviair, but that is at least, from the limited time that Gloria's had a chance to really try to impress upon the operators that they need to do better. That should be held up as a marker of an airport tenant that wants to do the right thing.
Thank you, Jim, but that only addresses one flight school.
Right.
And there's obviously more than that flight school running, because there are other facilities that Gloria will tell us they aren't flight schools that are doing the exact same thing. So they're actually doing training runs, but they're not listed as flight schools with your facility. So we will get someone in our neighborhood on your board and we'll work on it that way.
Your street address, I'm going to look it up on a map over here.
And Jim, maybe can you just go into, I know we discussed this at last meeting, the preferential use runway. So, Michelle, I know you talked about the same runway being used over and over, but that's just not accurate or true. So Jim, maybe you can talk about how the pattern is used, and it's up to the pilot's discretion and winds, and they work with the air traffic control. So maybe you can just do a little briefing on that again.
Richard just asked for, Michelle, if you're willing to give Richard your address, he said he would look it up right now.
It's, I'm on Anthony Lane. We're at the end of the runway, 927 runway,
What is the street address?
3 Anthony Lane.
Thank you.
On the extended center line. I guess, Gloria, I mean, I guess a couple things here, and that is, number one, again, the pilot ultimately has final authority on what runway that they're gonna use. And somebody had asked a question earlier about, flying in, or do they required to take off into the winds and into the prevailing wind or not? Ultimately, it's the pilot's discretion. They can take off into the wind, they can take off going with the wind, but from an operational and a safety perspective, aircraft tend to operate going into the wind because it provides them the greatest amount of lift in the shortest amount of time. So from an operational perspective, that tends to be how pilots will operate. But again, ultimately, it's at their discretion. Winds at Beverly, they tend to come from the west. In fact, really, honestly, 927 historically has been the primary runway, but starting back 20 years ago in the master plan, I think it was 1999, there was a intentional effort to make 1634 the primary runway to de-emphasize 927. And so in affiliation with that was an extension of 1634 at the time, preservation of a 100-foot wide runway. What we're doing here in this effort, we're continuing that effort that started 20 years ago by, when 927 is ultimately reconstructed, it's going to get narrowed, down to 75 feet. Now that's not, again, that's an encouragement probably of a larger aircraft to move over to 1634. But frankly, when it comes to smaller aircraft, they are going to tend to want to operate more into the wind. So unfortunately, it really does become a function of where the prevailing winds are operating from, especially when it comes to flight training. Because again, they're going to want to have the greatest amount of degree and factor of safety, which unfortunately often tends to be departing on runway 27.
Thanks, Jim. I think we have a couple other folks with their hand up. Is that right, Russ?
Yes, we have a Tim Donahue.
Hey, Tim.
Hi, Tim Donahue, Precinct 4 meeting member, Danvers. So Gloria had mentioned that she had conversations with several of the flight schools and flight clubs. Seeing as they've had no effect, and I'm currently tracking 3 planes doing continuous loops over our house, what is the result of those conversations? That's my first question. I have a follow-up.
I'll say Gloria can go ahead, Gloria.
Sure. So we cannot stop the operation of an aircraft. So those loops that are occurring, like I said, we are working with our operators to change the runways when they can. It's again up to the pilot's discretion, and the practices of doing a different rate of climb is also is going into effect now. So we can't actually stop the operation of the aircraft. So going over your house, those times, that is a normal activity. Like I said, we are working with our operators as well as the air traffic control to mitigate it where we can. Hillary, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I was just going to add that we're early in the process. So the subcommittee has been approved to be set up. We're working to get municipalities membership from all the jurisdictions. So I anticipate this. We've absolutely raised the level of awareness unequivocally in this conversation and the dialogue in the community. And I think it's going to take a little bit of time, and it's going to take steps. I mean, Gloria has 2 staff, and so this is a challenge, and the commission and Gloria are taking it on. It is going to take time to affect a positive outcome, and it's going to have to work constantly with changing students and changing operators. And it's just gonna take time. It is not gonna happen overnight.
I appreciate that it won't take time. It has been some time now that we've been talking about this. We have been very clear about this. You guys have said you've received this and had conversations, yet we have seen 0 results. So now my follow-up question is, it's my understanding that Lawrence has banned touch and goes. Is that a process that we should start here now? And if so, how can we go about that? Thank you.
Jim, I'm unaware of any airport's ability to ban touch and goes.
Yeah, I
have any
have not
information?
heard that, and I would submit that that's not correct, because no airport can ban those types of operations.
Thank you for that. I apologize if that's incorrect. That's something I was told. I'm curious, though, if there's a process that we can reduce these.
You know, from a federal requirements perspective, the airport is a federally funded facility. It's a public use facility. As Richard had mentioned, if an aircraft can safely operate on the airport, it has the right to do so. And so there are no limitations other than anything related to safety that can be applied.
Thank you for your answer. I do ask that we expedite the process to communicate with whoever necessary to make this happen faster, as this entire neighborhood is really at the end of their leash from how things have changed from such a short time ago as a year. Thank you.
Thank you. Russ, do we have someone else with a
Yes,
hand up?
we have 2 more hands up right now, and this is Marcia Coogan.
Marsha?
If you could unmute Marcia.
Okay, I think I'm finally there. Can you hear me
Yep.
okay?
We can hear
Yes,
you.
we can.
Okay, great, thank you. Sorry for the delay. I just quickly, you perked my my inquisitiveness about Lawrence Airport, and I just quickly Googled it while you were talking, and I just came up with a small blurb, and it doesn't seem to have a lot more information to give you, but it just said there'll be no transient aircraft touch and go operations on Saturdays and Sundays. So maybe we should kind of just check into that at some point to see what other comparable airports are doing.
Absolutely, we'll definitely follow up on that.
Okay, thank you.
I think that might be good information for you, Richard.
I'm looking now. I don't think that any airport can restrict that type of activity, but my guess is most of the touch and goes happening at Beverly, they're not transient aircraft, they're aircraft that are based at Beverly. So that type of policy, if it was possible, would have an effect. But I'll certainly look into Lawrence.
Okay, thank you. And we had someone else with their hand up.
The hand is down currently.
Okay.
Scott DeLea, did you want to speak? If so, raise your hand. Okay, recognize it.
Hey, this is Scott DeLea. I'm the actual chairman of the airport commission, and I just want to say that and I'm the one who started this noise committee. I want to assure you folks that I certainly am taking this very, very seriously. And Michelle, I'm taking this so seriously. Right now, I'm heading to Anthony Lane. I'm in my car because I want to hear what's going on there. And I've been out there before. So I was out there maybe 3 weeks ago with State Rep Sally Kearns, and I was meeting with one of your neighbors, Joe Rinaldi, who also lives on Anthony Lane. Joe is going to be on this committee. So let me tell you the problem that I've encountered just recently is that I need membership on this committee. So I've got somebody from Anthony Lane. So Michelle, I mean, I'd love to have you on it, but I'm looking for somebody else from another neighborhood also. Or we could expand the noise committee and maybe make another seat for Danvers. I'm open to all those things, but I do want to impress upon you as a chairperson of the Beverly Airport Commission that this is not some committee that was set up to placate anybody. This is a real working committee. And I think some of the points that you Danvers folks have raised are absolutely valid. Okay, so let me say that. This is not something where I think we're trying to say, oh, go away, or, well, this is, you move next to it. That attitude's gone. That's an attitude of the past. Right now, what I'm trying to do is improve communication between the Airport Commission and management in the town Danvers, where I think we have the biggest problem. I mean, we do have land in 3 communities, but Danvers seems to be the hotspot. So I do want, I'm going to enlist, the folks who are on this call, if you are interested in being on this noise committee. Again, it's a working committee and it's going to be a little bit of a time commitment. But what I'm planning on doing is holding public meetings, probably on a bi-monthly basis, so 6 meetings a year, where we get reports, detailed reports on how the air traffic is over people's neighborhoods. Now, keep in mind, I understand that we've got grant assurances, and certainly, we've got to, we can't limit certain things, and we only have certain power that we can wield to help you folks. But whatever is available, we're going to use it. Okay, if there is one person who keeps doing flybys over your house, we're going to identify that aircraft, and then we're going to approach the school that's coming from. We're going to make sure that there is some accountability, at the very least, some social accountability. If people are offending our good neighbor policy or not willing to get good neighbor policies, then we're going to have a mechanism to put a little bit of pressure on them to do the right thing by your community. All right, so and as to the communication gap, 3 weeks, I think what we should do now is that, and I think all complaints should go directly into the noise committee, and I think Gloria and I have talked about that a little bit, so that we can address them on the community level, on the committee level, and find out, again, who the offenders are, what, we can use Flight Tracker. We have all these sorts of resources to make sure that, maybe in the limited amount of power that we do have, we could be smart about it and, get people to do the right things for you folks. And, it's going to be something that the airport can live with. So I do want to, bridge that gap. And, sometimes I feel like, I just don't want you folks to feel steamrolled. It's a very real offer. My email address is Scott Dullea, DULLEA @gmail.com. And I will respond to any email or phone call. I heard somebody say that the commission's not responsive. That's not true. That is flat out not true. If you call me, you will get a call back. And I'll give you my cell phone number offline if you contact me via email. I've met with tons of people regarding this and other issues. So I think I've wasted enough oxygen on this, but I do want you to know that the commission is taking this very serious. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Russ, do we have anybody else?
We have 3 more hands. Right now we have Michelle.
I just wanted to thank Scott. It was my house that you met at. My husband, John, and Joe Rinaldi met with you and Bob Barrows. So thank you for meeting with us, and we will look forward to meeting again. Thank you.
Thanks. Russ, who's next?
Tim Donahue.
Tim?
Hi, this
Tim, we can't quite hear you.
Hi, Scott. My address is 98 Locust Street. I'm on the corner of Anthony Lane. You're welcome to sit in the front yard with me and enjoy the rest of the meeting while we watch the planes fly overhead. I just wanted to send that invitation. Thank you.
Thank you. Who's next?
We have Betancourt. Mr. Betancourt,
Mr. Betancourt?
please unmute.
All right, here we go. Question I have. Touch and goes to the FA guy. 4-minute touch and goes, is that normal? And at 500 feet, is that normal? Four-minute touch and goes, is that normal?
Mr. Betancourt, were you directing that question to?
The FA, the commander from the FAA.
Okay.
Mr. Doucette, please unmute.
I don't have an answer to your question. I think that would best be directed to the airport manager. I'm an environmental protection specialist working on environmental issues. I'm going to pilot.
No, I'm not saying to be a pilot. I'm just telling you. They do 4-minute touch and goes around here, okay?
We were told they were supposed to have
80 more than 6 in an hour is supposed to be dangerous, okay? And it's happened. It's a lot more than that. If you want film at 500 feet, I'd be glad to prove it for you. I have it, okay? I've been filming these things for a long time. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's a joke. Who am I talking to?
So I can try to best answer that. It depends on the aircraft. I'm trying to talk. So it depends on the aircraft.
1,600 feet, okay? Before, a while back was 1,000. A few years ago it was at 500. If you want, you can go on YouTube. If you go on YouTube, okay, there is a couple of videos, okay, they're talking to the tower, and it tells them they're flying at 500 feet, and that's illegal, if I'm not mistaken. I thought 1,000 feet. Anything taken off and landing, I think in flight is supposed to be at least 1,000 feet from the ground. Is that right or wrong?
Mr. Betancourt, Gloria is trying to respond to your question, so if you'll just pause a moment, she'll answer.
Thank you, Hillary. One question at a time so I can answer this, please.
Okay.
So, light aircraft are at 1,100 feet above ground level for a normal touch and go operation. Heavier aircraft are a bit higher than that, typically about 1,000 higher. Right. So a 4-minute touch and go may be typical for a specific type of aircraft, depending on the performance. I don't know specifically what type of aircraft you were talking about, but it depends on the aircraft performance in the pattern as well.
Well, what happens when your flight count gets off? You tighten the pattern up. When you tighten the pattern up, okay, that's just what's happening, okay? And I have one other question. The practice area that used to be over at Plum Island in Ipswich, is it still over there, or are you guys doing it in Danvers now?
It's not over Danvers. The practice area is still
there's a lot of flying aircraft that usually over.
Mr. Betancourt, Gloria's trying to respond to your question about the practice area. Could you hold for a moment, please? Thank you.
The practice area is still over by Plum Island area. The aircraft operating area would never allow a practice area near the airport environment. That's just not a safe environment to do any type of maneuvering that is required in the training. That is all done usually at above 3,000 feet.
Well, if you go to Cranes Beach, okay, on a nice sunny day, you'll see them sometimes going up, shutting the motor off, and doing all kinds of maneuvers over there.
Yep, so the North Shore area, some of that area towards Plum Island is identified as a practice area.
Okay. I guess that's what I have for, I don't know, what else can you tell me? I mean, I don't know. All we know is, I don't know how you guys did a noise study because it's been quiet. I mean, the winds has been unbelievable. Your flight count must be off like crazy, I guarantee you that. Because we've been watching. Today's the first good day we have, and you're already driving everybody crazy already, basically. And
so I'll just encourage you to go to the airport website, and the technical report is Appendix B of the documents, and it talks about the methodology that's used.
Yeah, we know. I know. The best thing for us to do really is we're going to have the health inspector, when we get one of Danvers, come out here with a decibel meter and find out what's going on, because I have a funny feeling, folks, he's trying to play us. Noise is too loud over here, okay? You can't handle it, okay? That's all I can tell you.
Okay, understood. Do we have anybody else for us on the line who's got their hand up?
No one at this time. There's a comment in the chat. Oh, we do have a hand up. We have Jane.
Jane, go ahead.
Jane, would you like to unmute?
Yes, I did. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. I happen to have been one of the first 2 Danvers commissioners on the Beverly Airport. And at that time, we did have a good neighbor policy. No touch and goes after 2 o'clock Sunday afternoon. Lawrence had the same thing. Bill Mahoney got rid of that somewhere along the line after I was gone, but Lawrence did not. So Lawrence planes take off, come to Beverly, do their touch and goes, and go back to Lawrence. That is a fact. And I actually, one Sunday afternoon, printed out the takeoffs and landings from someone that left Lawrence, came to Beverly, did their touch and goes, and went back to Lawrence. So I know it's a long time ago, but we did have it and got rid of it. Would be a great idea to get it back for the neighbors. We don't need that airport any larger now. The first two Danvers Airport commissioners were put on to stop expansion at Beverly Airport. And in fact, then in '99, when they came up and they expanded, they said that would be the last expansion. And it's not, but it needs to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else, anybody else before we move on to the rest of the presentation?
Mr. Betancourt has raised his hand again.
Mr. Betancourt?
I guess I don't. I was just having a good time talking to you folks. It's terrible. The planes have stopped. I'm outside right now because I was going to play it for you. You know what I mean? Going around in circles, but right now they're calm. I'll tell you what. A while ago, I'm right sitting on my front steps because I wanted you to hear it. But it's terrible. They just stopped. That's terrible, isn't it? I've been for quite a while. I've had my hand raised and nothing happened. So that was the whole 9 yards. I don't know. I have to. If you want, I got film. I can play film for you. Maybe you can come over and I can show it to you. Okay. Thank
you.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Betancourt.
If I could jump in on one thing real quick, Mr. Betancourt, again, if you indicated that you've witnessed aircraft operating unsafely, again, if you go to the airport's website under the noise and safety information, there is a link there to put you in contact with the Flight Standards District Office. The FAA is concerned about aircraft that are not operating safely, and if you have evidence of that, we would certainly encourage you to report those people to the FAA. They will take action on those reports. Related to the comment actually that Jane had made just a minute ago as well, and I want to extend my apologies to Mr. Donahue because I did go to the website and I just posted the website for Lawrence Airport that does indicate prohibitions on touch and goes. We'll take a look into that. I have to confess, I don't believe that's actually legal. But we will absolutely look further into that. So I appreciate the comment.
Right. Well, with that, we're going to move on in our presentation. So for those of you who were at our January meeting, some of this is a little bit of a retouch on it. For those of you who are not, we're just going to touch on a couple key points with master planning. So we do want to talk a little bit about the master plan process so everyone understands what we're doing here in this process. This is a 20-year planning document. It provides guidance to the commission and to the airport staff for the safe and orderly development of the airport. It does need to be reflective of community values, and it needs to be a thoughtful and purposeful process. And so we've tried very hard to make sure that we've afforded opportunity for input. We are balancing that obviously with the FAA requirements and grant conditions that the airport must comply with. The master plan process does not have a predetermined outcome. This has all come about, as you may be aware of, through our process of evaluating the airport, the inventory, the facilities, their conditions, the future demand forecast, and what needs to take place in order for the airport to have a safe and efficient airport that meets all safety and federal guidelines. So in this process, we had identified a series of steps. We are now in phase 4, which is the implementation phase. And what you're going to be hearing from us tonight is some of the components of the improvement plan and the phasing of that plan in conjunction with the financing. We will then move on in putting all of that documentation together. That will be reviewed by the FAA and ultimately will be submitted to the commission, the airport commission, for their consideration, review, and determination for approval. So we're closing down on the process, but there's still a couple more steps to go. So we are here in the schedule in April of 2021, and we have a few more months of this documentation process. And this meeting tonight is a really important meeting for you to get your comments in. We're also going to afford, as we did before, another public comment period following this evening's meeting for you to submit those to us in writing. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim, and he's going to walk us through the implementation plan.
Great, thank you, Hillary, and you can go to the next slide. So as we had discussed, where we are in the plan right now is we're in our last set of meetings. We had looked at the alternatives that were being proposed, and we'll talk more about those here in just a second. But before we get too far into that, what I wanted to do is just kind of revisit a couple of the key elements of the master plan that we've undertaken up to this point, just to remind everybody of how we got to where we are here today. Specifically, just as a reminder of some of the goals that we're trying to achieve here through this plan, that is that first and foremost, safety is key at all times. And our primary goal here is to make sure that the airport operates, is designed and operates safely and in conformance with best management practices as well as regulations identified and dictated by the Federal Aviation Administration. In addition to that, we want to support and enhance the airport's operational safety and efficiency. Those two really kind of work hand in hand together. We do want to address the needs of airport operators and tenants. We've heard quite a bit from those folks. We are looking at maximizing or enhancing business opportunities for the airport. I'll address that in just a little bit more detail here in a second. But everything needs to be balanced against the impacts to the neighbors and the environment. Again, we're not operating in a vacuum. We recognize that. It's important that the airport do its due diligence and do its best to try to minimize those impacts, on the surrounding community. And certainly that's been a large part of the conversation that we're in the middle of right now. To revisit the business development opportunities, the reason why we've included that in there, I just wanted to mention a couple of things. And one is that it's important to recognize that, while the airport is owned by the city of Beverly and it's a public transportation facility, it's operated as an enterprise fund. And what that means is that effectively the airport has to be operated as a business. It's responsible to be self-sustaining and self-funding. It doesn't receive a dime of funding support from the city of Beverly or from any other municipality. And I think that Mr. Betancourt, you had asked a question earlier about, we can address it further actually in further Q&A, but historically the airport, because it's operated traditionally on very narrow margins, it has traditionally funded any of its larger capital projects through the sale of airport property, which is what it's done. And frankly, that's happened enough now that, frankly, the airport doesn't have much available property left. And so obviously that's an unsustainable model to be able to sell properties to fund, paving and repaving and reconstruction of runways and things along those lines. So it really is incumbent upon the airport to embrace the fact that it needs to operate as a business and needs to be self-sustaining in the future because that's its mandate as an enterprise fund. Hillary, you can go to the next slide. As a reminder, also, much of the basis of what we're talking about here are rooted in forecasts that were generated and reviewed and approved by the Federal Aviation Administration. And in the last set of meetings, we had just shown the beginning and the end and the growth rate, but these are the actual numbers. And again, this chapter is actually available online, so please, review it and get back to us with any questions on that. But we are showing growth from 2019 of approximately 67,000 operations 2020. Even with COVID, the airport experienced an increase in those operations, which is, evidenced by some of the many of the comments we received from particularly from folks in Danvers, and that's projected to continue to increase in the future. As part of that forecast effort was also the determination that the design aircraft for the airport, which is really the largest aircraft that regularly operates at the airport and serves as the basis for those safety standards, is going to remain the same as what it has been in the past, which is classified as a B2. And it's more representative of that aircraft that's shown in the lower right. That is what's classified as the design aircraft for the airport. There are larger aircraft that do operate at the airport. As somebody had mentioned earlier, I think it was Mr. Betancourt had mentioned earlier, larger aircraft do operate there. They just don't operate at the level to which the airport should change its design standards to meet the needs for that. Now, that being said, the FAA does recognize that these larger aircraft do operate at the airport. So they want to the best of their ability, enhance the level of safety for those aircraft. And that's reflected in some of the recommendations that we had advanced in our last meeting, and that are reflected actually in the next slide. Hillary, can you shoot that over? So since those the larger aircraft are operating at the airport, the FAA had made two recommendations to us when it comes to 1634. And if you remember, 1634 is the primary runway, is now the primary runway. It didn't used to be, it is now. The runway is currently 100 feet wide. Based on that design aircraft I mentioned a minute ago, the FAA standard for that is for a standard width for that runway is 75 feet. The FAA is recommended that we maintain that 100-foot wide runway because of the larger aircraft that are operating at the airport. In association with that, we've also advanced the prospect of paving over the existing runway safety areas, which is an additional 600 feet of pavement. Now, that's a safety enhancement, but to be clear, it's an operational enhancement as well. That will allow aircraft that are operating on 1634 an additional 300 feet to utilize in taking off, which means they can start their takeoff around 300 feet further away from the end of the runway than they currently are today. In conjunction with that, the narrowing of runway 927, which goes from 100 feet down to 75 feet, again, helps promote the fact that 1634 is the primary runway for the airport. And again, it will, with the goal of encouraging, corporate aircraft operations to migrate more towards 1634. We've made a series of taxiway realignment suggestions to, again, enhance safety and efficiency and actually bring the airport more in conformance with best practices as well as current design standards. There will be additional pavement on the airfield, but we'll also be removing pavement, on the airfield as well. We recognize that's an important environmental consideration. It was mentioned earlier that with respect to any of these projects, environmental permitting and requirements must be met for every one of these projects. And impervious surfaces is one of those. Noise is another consideration. There's a whole raft of these environmental considerations that need to be addressed and permits obtained in order for these projects to move forward. And you'll see those reflected in the plan moving forward. Landslide development, again, goes back to the need of the airport to be self-sustaining. As opportunities are made available for future development for, say, for example, hangars, those are part of the plan as well. A vehicle service road, which has been incorporated into that impervious surfaces, has also been introduced or has been suggested, and specifically by the tower as a safety enhancement. Right now, fuel trucks will migrate from one side of the airport to the other, crossing over the primary runway 1634. Again, we want to enhance the safety of that runway, and one way of doing that is to make sure that those fuel trucks don't operate on the runway. So a vehicle service road will be introduced that migrates from one side of the airport to the next around the north side of the runway. And as I mentioned before, there's a whole raft of environmental considerations that will have to be addressed by both the state and by the federal government in association with any of the projects we propose. You can go to the next slide, Hillary. As a reminder, the alternatives that we had introduced in our last in our last meetings, these are reflective of what was introduced as being the recommended plan. I have to say, really, of the 54 comments that we received, none of them actually specifically really addressed the facilities themselves. Obviously, noise is the big issue, and these are in part, related to some of those considerations. But I did want to note that the recommended plan, as it stands today for 1634, is to reconstruct that runway, to maintain it as a B2 runway, to pave the safety areas at 300 feet on either end, to maintain it at 100-foot wide, width. We have received some comments about this, and I would say also that even the town of Danvers has recognized this as being the recommended plan, as well as the narrowing of runway 927, which is on the next slide, Hillary. So again, runway 927 is currently at 4,755 feet in length. It will remain at that length. The width, again, will be narrowed from 100 feet wide down to 75 feet wide. Again, that's going to serve as an encouragement for corporate aviation to migrate to 1634. But to be frank, it's, a 75-foot wide runway is plenty adequate for them to operate on that, as well as it's more than likely won't serve as a deterrence for small single-engine aircraft. So we can go to the next slide. I referenced earlier that we've made a series of recommendations on the taxiways. The old taxiway system at the airport, or the existing taxiway system at the airport, is based on World War II era designs. They are not consistent or conform with existing design standards. We're showing an awful lot of changes on the airfield when it comes to the taxiways. And what this represents is an ultimate plan for the airport. These changes aren't going to happen overnight. Many of these changes aren't even going to happen within the planning window of this master plan. But we do need to, our goal here is to identify what an ultimate configuration may be. The taxiways that are highlighted in blue are ones that we've actually included in the implementation plan. The ones in pink are projects that, could happen eventually at some point down the line. More than likely, they're going to occur outside the 20-year window. But one of our goals here is to preserve for that potential. We need to at least identify this potential plan so that 10, 15 years down the line, when people are revisiting this master plan, they see what our intent was at this point. I mentioned earlier that there's a variety of other taxiways and old pavement that can be removed. Those are reflected in the red areas. So those are impervious surfaces that will be removed ultimately. From a noise perspective, I will note that some of these taxiways, many of these taxiways are going to be moved closer into the existing runways. So from a noise signature perspective, those aircraft will be operating further away from the airport property boundary. That's not a significant or measurable, significantly measurable difference, but that is a difference. And so there will be some ancillary benefit affiliated with that when it comes to impacting of neighboring areas. I will note also that there's a dark blue line that runs around the north of the airport. That's the vehicle service road I had mentioned. Again, currently fuel trucks have to go across the main runway. This will allow those fuel trucks to go around the outside of the runway. And again, so it's a safety enhancement that's been requested by the air traffic control tower. So you can go to the next slide. So the implementation plan this is not super exciting, I have to confess. Really, what we're doing is we're identifying the projects, and we then break them down into 3 phases. Phase 1 being the first 5 years, phase 2, second 5 years, phase 3, the next 10 years. This master plan is looking at a 20-year window, and that encapsulates these 3 phases. We also identify what the anticipated cost of these projects are going to be, as well as potential funding sources for the projects. And just so you're aware, the primary funding sources for capital projects is the federal government, the FAA, through the FAA, the state through MassDOT Aeronautics, and locally where the airport has to match grants and funding that's provided by both the federal and the state. I do want to mention that other funding sources do include private development as well, because as hangars are constructed, the airport is not in the hangar construction business, but hangars that do get built are a private investment that are made by folks who are wanting to be on the airport. You can go to the next slide, Hillary. Through the financial review, and again, this is a document that's available online right now in draft format for you all to take a look at. We've reviewed multiple airport documents, interviewed many people at the airport, looked at historical and current operating revenues, made projections for those, established a capital improvement plan, which is again that listing of projects as well as the phasing associated with that, which we'll talk more about here in just a second. Looked at the sources and timing of capital funding. We took a look at rates and charges and provided some revenue enhancement recommendations for the airport, again, for it to hopefully be more self-sustaining into the future. Just a quick note, go to the next slide, Hillary. The federal government, the FAA, for capital programs, generally provides the majority of the funding for AIP eligible project. AIP is the Airport Improvement Program. That is a program established by the FAA that is funded by the Airport and Airway Trust Fund through a variety of different aeronautical related taxes. There are a variety of standards and ways that projects can get funded through the AIP. For most airports, large projects are funded in this means. And so 90% of many of these projects we're going to be introducing here are going to be funded by the FAA. Next slide, Hillary. For the remaining 10%, MassDOT Aeronautics will provide a 5% match for those AIP eligible projects. And that's funding that's provided by the biennial statewide transportation bond, as well as several other taxes and fees that are related to aviation. MassDOT also does have its own program for funding of projects at an airport called the Airport Safety and Maintenance Program, and that provides funding in an 80-20 split, and we do have some projects in our CIP related to that program. You can go to the next slide. And then the remaining 5% has to come locally. And as I mentioned before, the airport as an enterprise fund has to provide its own funding for its own operation, including capital development. So they have to come up with the 5% funding to match the 90% from the FAA and the 5% from the state. The revenues that the airport collects are through a handful of different fees, including fuel flowage, landing fees, tie downs, other user fees, as well as land leases. The majority of the revenue that the airport does collect and funds its operations with do occur through land leases. So as I mentioned, what we've done is we've taken that larger plan and broken them down into individual projects, and then taken those projects and broke them up into these 3 phases. And I won't spend a lot of time on the numbers, and we can certainly answer questions about any specifics on this. But I will note that the first phase, this 21 through 25, is really is the most important phase, because this is the phase that is obviously the most immediate, it reflects the most immediate needs for the airport. And I will note that CIP IDE, which is the reconstruction of runway 1634, is the most important project that the airport has in the upcoming 5 years. There are 2 associated environmental projects that are going to have to be undertaken in order to get to that point. And that's related to the design and the conduction of an environmental assessment, an environmental notification form, and other permitting that would be required for that. And as I mentioned before, for any of these projects, most will trigger some sort of environmental review. So those are steps that are going to be undertaken even before, again, we get to the actual reconstruction of runway 1634. I will note that there are 2 other projects we've noted on here as being privately funded. These are not specific projects. We wanted to identify these as being potentials to represent the fact that there is interest by private entities to build hangars on the airport. And they want to be partners with the airport. They want to invest in the airport. So this is not a strictly a if we build it, they will come type of a scenario. There are people that want to invest in the airport and are willing to put their own money into it. It's not just the airport or the FAA or MassDOT. And then the last item on there is that the airport, does have equipment. That equipment has to be replaced. And this is the request on this for a front-end loader, which will be helpful in a variety of different functions for the airport, is a project that would be eligible under that ASMP program for the that MassDOT Aeronautics is offering. So again, these are the 5 years. I will note that these projects are reviewed every year annually. In September timeframe, the airport sits down with all of the funding agencies. They look at each one of these projects, make sure that it's still appropriate, still make sure that the costs are appropriate, and that everything is still in alignment. Again, this is probably the highest priority for any of the projects that we're going to be introducing here. And we can go to the next slide, actually. The next phase is the next 5 years, and these are again more projects that are reflective of the general plan that we've introduced earlier, which are changing of some of the taxiways, the construction of the perimeter road, and in addition to the potential of other construction of other hangars. Again, those are not defined specific proposals right now. These are just being shown as being potential proposals. The order of these projects is open for discussion, frankly, and it's going to be a function of what is the highest priority for the airport, what is the condition of the existing pavements out there on the airfield, and what is funding availability. Those taxiways I had shown getting relocated, those are only going to happen when the existing taxiway pavement degrades to the point where there needs to be some sort of an action that's undertaken on that. So taxiway pavement life is, typically projected to be a minimum of 20 years. So how these projects actually ultimately lay out within the airport is going to be variable. And as we move forward in the years in that first phase, some of these projects, as they start to, as we move forward in years, some of these projects will start to fall into that first phase. And so they'll start working their way into the queue. So I just, wanted to mention that, or just wanted to emphasize that while we're identifying these projects in these groupings and in these years, it is very much open for discussion. You can go to the next slide, Hillary. And phase 3, which is really the tail end of the planning period, the final 10 years. Similarly, these projects can be ordered in any variety of different ways based on funding and pavement condition. But I will note that we have the reconstruction of 927, being reflected here, as well as some of the other taxiway work that we've suggested. Go to the next slide, Hillary.
So thanks, Jim. This is going to be our next section of clarifying questions. We have one more group of slides to go through. So any questions for Jim regarding the implementation plan?
We have a couple hands up. Marcia Coogan is first.
Marcia.
Okay, I unmuted. Hopefully I'm coming through. Oh, good. Okay. I have a question about the 2 runways, the changes and so forth that you're planning on those runways. It sounds like the 1634 is used primarily for the larger aircraft. Is that correct?
Well, again, with the runways that the aircraft operate on are at the discretion of the pilots.
Okay,
But
I understand that. Okay.
What I would say for the larger aircraft, it's always it's typically to the larger aircraft's benefit to be operating on the longer runway, the wider runway, the one that has greater degrees of safety. Now, if the winds are in such a way that it makes it more difficult for them, then they always have the option to move to a different runway, but effectively this is enticing them or encouraging them to operate, off of that larger runway.
Okay, I guess I'm kind of wondering, like, why would you reduce the width for the 927 runway? I guess you're saying it's not necessary, but why are you reducing it?
So it gets into the nuances of the FAA design standards. And as I mentioned earlier, I talked a little bit about the design aircraft, or the design code for runway 1634 is classified as being a B2, and that's a coding classification system that the FAA uses. Well, 1634 is this B2, and 927 is also this B2. And if you go into the airport design criteria, the actual standard runway width for a B2 runway is 75 feet. And the FAA will typically just fund up to what their design standards are. So they frankly, the FAA, who provides 90% of the funding, will only fund up to 75 feet. The FAA, in the case of 1634, is willing to make an exception on that because they do recognize that some of these larger aircraft do operate on that runway. So they want to provide that additional level of safety enhancement. So really 927 is just complying with current design standards, while 1634 is going to exceed the current design standards. Does that answer your question?
Well, I guess a little bit. It's still just kind of a little bit hard to figure out, if you have a little too much width and you're not using it, why would you destroy it? But I understand pretty much what you just said, just kind of question a little bit. I guess what I'm also wondering is if the results of going from 100 feet width to 75 feet, does that mean that runway would be used a lot more for stop and go traffic, resulting in more aircraft traffic?
The aircraft, first off, the aircraft that are operating on the touch and goes, they can operate on either one of the runways, and so it wouldn't be an encouragement or a discouragement, for those types of operations. Again, those types of aircraft are small aircraft. They are much more susceptible to winds, and so they're much more apt to be operating into the prevailing winds. As I think I mentioned earlier, that while 927 was the primary runway, there's been a progressive encouragement that the airport has undertaken over the past 20 years to make 1634 more the primary runway, which is, again, it's consistent with what we're proposing here, which again is, having the larger runway be 1634 and the smaller, shorter and narrower runway to be 927. But in terms of encouraging smaller aircraft, it's going to be at the discretion of the pilot, and neither one of these changes should really realistically change their operating patterns.
Okay, thank you.
And Michelle has her hand raised.
Yes, Michelle.
Hi, Jim. I have one more question. While the large runway is under construction, it doesn't shut down the airport naturally, but does it deter all the traffic to the other runway?
During construction of 1634, that runway will have to be shut down. And yes, then in fact the airport, while they're working on the intersection between those two runways, effectively, and I would invite, we do have a couple of the engineers on the call that can speak to this more than I, to speak more specifically about it. But when that intersection is being reconstructed, then the airport will be shut down for that period of time. I don't know what that timing is, and I don't know if I would encourage either Bob or Craig to jump in on this. Or not. Short answer is, Michelle, yes, during that time of construction, which will take several months, as I understand it, 1634 will have to be shut down.
So so basically you'll redirect the traffic to the other runway.
But by definition, yeah, if anybody who wants to operate on at Beverly Airport while 1634 is under reconstruction, they would have to use 927, yes. And the same is conversely, when 927 ultimately is reconstructed, all traffic would have to operate on 1634.
Okay, and do you have a time frame as to, I know this is a 20-year plan, but, what's the time frame? Are they looking at the next 5 years that construction will do, or?
Right now, I would say the construction is projected to be 2025 for actual work to be occurring.
Okay, thank you.
Russ, do we have anyone else?
Yes, Mr. Betancourt and one other have raised their hand.
Okay, Mr. Betancourt?
How you doing? The question I have, on runway 9, right, we're taking right-hand turns. Why can't we take left? Can we get that answer finally? I've been waiting for that answer for a while.
Well,
So I can answer that. There are left and right-hand turns, so left is a standard traffic pattern, and there are right-hand turns. So there are left and right-hand turns.
Right, but on the runway 9, you always take right-hand turns.
No, that's not true.
Yes.
There are left and right-hand turns.
Not if you watch it. I got the radio here. I watch it all the time. Whenever they're ever on 9, but when they're on 9, they take right-hand turns. Does it have to do with the blades of the lake? Is that it?
No, again, there are left and right-hand traffic pattern turns depending on the air traffic control as well as the aircraft in the pattern.
Do you ever think? Can I ask a question though? Really though, do you folks ever think of really taking all the noise and putting it on that side of the airport where there's all that open space over in Wyndham and Topsfield and that area there? Do you ever think of that? Instead of driving all over Danvers?
So again, it's up to the pilot's discretion, and we're working with the operators and the air traffic control tower.
No, but if you really pay attention,
the aircraft and it really, again, it's a component of the wind and several other factors.
I understand that, but I've been watching this airport for a long time. Bought a radio, did all kinds of stuff to see what's going on. All I'm trying to explain to you is Danvers is getting all the noise. There's an inequity of distribution out of that airport, okay? If you look at the other side of the airport on Route 97, okay, all open space over there. I don't know why you don't fly over there and give us a break. That's what I'm trying to explain to you. I don't know why.
We can go back and show the noise models, but the noise models also show noise around the airport and around the other runways as well. So we can review those online.
Those noise models are a bunch of baloney, okay? Please. I have a decimal meter. I know what I'm talking about, okay? I told you, we need a health inspector. We have to get the health inspector out here to look at this. We're gonna have to, as soon as we hire one in Danvers.
Understood, Mr. Betancourt. Do you have any other questions?
That's it.
Thank you. We had someone else have their hand up?
Yes, Bob and Mary Barrows.
Go ahead, Bob.
Hi, I kind of joined a little late, but since day one, when we first had the first call, my concern has always been the increased volume of activity on 927 and how it's changed so significantly in the last 12 months. And I know I've heard, some excuses about, the airport was closed and there was this demand immediately, but we still experienced, I had a day in March where planes were flying over my house at the rate of 25 an hour, the first week of March, the last week in February. So, to me, that argument about people were not using the airport and all of a sudden we had this, sudden volume, it was a bunch of baloney. The noise continues on 927. It continued today. We've been listening to it as this has been going on. And now I just heard in response to Michelle's comment that, my attitude is I don't want to ever have a summer like I had last summer. And I'm concerned that last summer is going to be the new norm. And now I just heard Jim tell me that for a period of several months, all the traffic is going to divert to the same runway that I've been complaining about since January. What have you done to address our concerns about the noise in our neighborhood? I'm going to reiterate what the tax assessor said in the town of Wenham about this process. This is just as a show. You have an agenda, and you've offered us time to make comments, but I don't see anything that's addressing the issue that we have in our neighborhood about the noise that we constantly hear. Today it was every 2 or 3 minutes since 1:30 this afternoon. And to tell me that you're going to shut down the other runway and I'm going to even listen to it more, that's intolerable. So, there needs to be a better solution than this. I'm sorry.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Barros. Any other hands for us?
I'm not seeing any other hands.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I just want to wrap up with a couple of slides to just advise you on the process and where we're at and what the next steps will be. So, as I mentioned earlier, we're in phase 4 of the implementation. If you go on the website later tonight, this presentation will be posted, but also already posted is the chapter, the implementation chapter, as well as the noise study, the communication log from the January meetings, and the noise phase I mentioned. So all those documents are there. And we would like to receive comments by May 28th for the public comment period. And you can email those to Jim. And as you get on the website, you'll see this and this information. And then our next step will be to compile the final report, all of the information, work through the airport layout plan, which is the document that reflects the potential projects over the next 20 years. That will go into the FAA for their review and comment. And once that comes back, and that's a 60 to 90 day period, and then it will come back to the Airport Commission for their consideration. So there will be another opportunity, and we don't have that date yet. It will be driven by the FAA's review and their comments, but we will certainly publicize that as soon as we know when that will be. So with that, I just want to remind everyone, this meeting's all this meeting information is on the website. We will be conducting community meetings with Wenham and Beverly this week as well. And we'll be working to produce a final documentation of the process. Again, comments due by May 28th. I encourage you to submit them. We are including those as documentation and responding as we develop the documents as best we are able. So with that, we want to open up for final comments or questions for anything that has not been raised to date. Anything else that you want to share with us at this time?
So we have Marsha Coogan. Please unmute.
Hi again. I just wanted to ask you a little bit about security for the airport. I didn't see any listing of changes for security. So I wondered if you could comment on that. Any enhancements to security at the airport, that type of thing?
I can answer to that. The Beverly Regional Airport is a general aviation airport in which we are not required by 1542, which TSR regulations, though we take it very seriously because of our close proximity to Boston Logan and other airports within the region. And so we have a full security program. We have security fences. We have gate access. Individuals who need to be at the airport are there through a badge system. And so we do not have any individuals that are at the airport that do not need to do business or anything else. They have to actually be invited by the businesses at the airport in order to be on the airport. And so we take security as well as safety as one of the as our top priority at the airport.
Okay, thank you.
Who do we have next, Russ?
Currently no one. If anyone has any question, if they could raise their hand.
Actually, Russ, I'm sorry, I just happened to see one chat question from a Mr. Splain. He asked, when we take our cars in for an inspection and they go through the entire process, at the end of the day, they fail me with a loud muffler. Why can't we do the same for small aircraft? And I just will note that aircraft have to pass FAA mechanical safety standards as well. And if there is an issue with the equipment, with the engine, then they will get failed. It's just that the standard for the noise that we're talking about here, is not consistent. The standard for noise, their review and operation or review of the aircraft is more related to the mechanicals of it. There's a fundamental level of noise that a propeller generates, and that is not something that can be mitigated. Just wanted to acknowledge that.
Okay, thanks, Jim. All right, well, I just want to remind everybody that if you have comments, to please get those in by the 28th. We will also document the comments that we've heard this evening and make sure that they are included and responded to as the document is developed. And thank you for your time this evening. And if you have any follow-up, Gloria and Jim are available to respond to any emails that you may have, and that email address is on your screen, and you can reach us on the website as well. So thanks and have a good evening. We appreciate your feedback.
Thank you very much.